The wise still seek him. Last week, as we began Advent, we were reminded both of the need for hope and the reason we can hope even in darkness. Our hope comes in the certainty of Jesus Christ, not merely as history or as a distant promise, but as a gift given today. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Last week and this were focused on this future coming of Jesus at the end of time, in majesty as King, making all things right. Notice, though, that the kingship of Jesus is not about forcing us to do his will, nor is the majesty of Jesus the pomp and circumstance and riches of British royalty that we've seen so much of since the Queen died. Rather, this future coming of Jesus will bring God's gentleness and kindness. The wolf shall be a guest of the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf and the young lion together with a little child to guide them. The cow and the bear's neighbors, together their young shall rest. The lion eat hay like the ox. The baby play by the cobra's den, and the child will lay his hand on the adder's lair. There shall be no harm or ruin on all my holy mountain. This future coming brings us hope, because Christ has already come to us in history. And next week, and the one following after that, as we get further into Advent and closer to Christmas, we will shift from looking at the end of time to going back in time, to the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago in a stable beneath a star. But joining the hope of the future coming of Christ to our remembrance of his historical coming is faith. Through the Spirit that Isaiah prophesied in our first reading, God promises the Spirit, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and strength, a spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord, and his delight shall be the fear of the Lord. Notice the culmination of the Spirit comes in the fear of the Lord. Now, the fear of the Lord is not what we usually think of when we hear or use the word fear, something threatening to us, something to avoid or push away. No, the term fear of the Lord is a recognition of who God is and how God works, of the great awesomeness of God. It's why John the Baptist says he's not worthy to carry sandals. It is fear of the Lord that allows us to recognize God's great power given to us with an even greater gentleness and love. Notice how well this resonates with the seasons of Advent and Christmas. God doesn't come as the powerful overlord, but in the smallness of a baby. God does not want to frighten us or to force us into submission, even if it's for our own good. Even John the Baptist had to admit, not once but twice, that he was wrong when he gives a description of the coming of the kingdom as he does today. That he didn't recognize Jesus as Messiah because Jesus came not with the harshness that is due us, but with the mercy and the gentleness of God. Jesus is very clear throughout his life. He wants to be friends with us. Remember when he called his disciples? I no longer call you slaves, he said, because a slave doesn't know what his master is doing. You are my friends. I have called you friends because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you to go and bear fruit that will remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. And this reality points to the second virtue of Advent, faith. We started with hope, the moral certainty, even if only in our minds, the conviction of hope here and now, of God's presence, of God's plan, of God's persistence. But faith builds on hope. Faith goes beyond hope. It goes beyond the intellectual to belief, and a belief that leads to action. Faith is not belief in teaching, doctrine, or dogma. Rather, faith is a belief in and a relationship with a person, Jesus Christ. Faith is an active trust in God, a belief that God is present here and now in my life, and then allowing that belief to guide and shape the way I see things, the way I meet people, our hearts and our lives. As Catholics, we don't often talk about a relationship with Jesus. We think more of our faith as tenets of the creed, the sacraments of the church, doctrines, dogmas, moral teachings, right living, justice. And all of these are certainly important, even essential. But none of them, even all of them together, are enough. It's the point that John the Baptist is making in our gospel. Do not think you can claim to be sons of Abraham because you're doing everything right. God can make, even from these stones, children. But to be a person of faith is to be something more than one who does the right thing. Using a rather negative image, all of those things that I mentioned are, as a doctor would say, symptoms of an underlying cause. This cause, though, is certainly not a disease, but the love of God. All of that, the tenets of the creed, the sacraments of the church, doctrines, dogmas, moral teachings, right living, acts of justice, are just signs of the God who lives and loves us, the active result of God's love in this world here and now. Faith is understanding, then, the awesome, omnipotent, omniscient God, omnipresent God makes himself available to me, makes himself vulnerable and small to come to me in a way that does not overwhelm me. The way God came to us in history is a sign of the relationship that God wants with us now. Not slaves, but friends. Not accosting, but approaching us. Not overpowering us, but inviting us. This is the God who comes to us now. This is the Christ who calls us to know and to love him. And St. Paul reminds us this is the reason also for our hope. Like any relationship, John shows us that we need some space and some time to know God, to establish a relationship with God, to hear God's voice, to sense God's presence. John went off by himself in the desert, wore camel's hair before it was fashionable, ate locusts so that nothing would distract him from placing himself at God's disposal, so that he could know God's love and allow that love to fill his heart and flow through him. Indeed, since John had prepared the way in his own heart, God's love flows through him as a beacon to others, leading them to the forgiveness of sins, conversion of hearts, transformation of lives, for any and all who come looking for salvation. It's one of the reasons why this season of Advent is so important, that like John, we can focus on our relationship with Jesus, not just for us, but as St. Paul reminds us in our second reading, to join our minds and hearts together and join them with that of Christ to share with all the love of God. Let me close with a brief personal example of how this relationship of Christ can work. After all, it may seem one-sided, but a true relationship is always about give and take, involves both giving and receiving. As you know, as we announced last week, the church is facing another dark time. And I have spent a great deal of time in prayer about the sexual abuse of minors in the church, asking God for healing, for transparency, for hope. And I begged God to hear and to help me. And God responded. God responded not with a voice from the clouds or a sign, a bulletin board on the side of the road that said, "This is your sign." No, God responded in the quiet gestures of so many of you, stopping me on the way out of church. One lady even stopping me in the parking lot. Not just with pious platitudes, but encouragement, strength, and with always the promise of prayers. I asked God, and God provided through you. The wise still seek him in faith.